Okay, so what we're going to talk about, introduce you to, is the bodice. Alright, so you would have I put up for you the bodice block identification task. You've got able to print out the mini blocks. You can print out these to do along with me in the video, but I want you to make toiles in the full scale bodice blocks, so you need to have these printed out and put in card if you want to do them as mini versions, but you also need to have the large bodice blocks either and or the size 10 and 12 fronts that are hanging up in the studio. First thing you need to do is the block identification task. It's got all of the labels and you need to just put them in the right places. When I'm going through stuff, it might answer some of those questions for you. Once you've done your block identification task and you've got everything prepared, you need your pattern cutting equipment as requested, and you're going to look at cutting and pivoting the French dart. The French dart is known standard bust darts and waist darts on a garment. You've got your armholes and your neck, so we just got a fitted bodice. A French dart is a combined dart, so it's just a single dart and it's at an angle, so it comes down at a low angle and it's in the side seam here. So it's the combined dart, which is both the bust and the waist dart combined into one dart. Now we do this and use the combined methods a lot. Obviously you've only used the skirt block, which just had the waist dart, so we've got two darts here. It looks a bit strange on your block because this is the bust dart. It goes from the bust point here up and there's two marks there, and the pivot point is really essential. It's where the two meet. That's not where the dart ends. The dart ends need to be shorter, otherwise you get a little bit of a Madonna poke. So you need those to be a bit shorter when you finish them. But when we're doing our pattern cutting, we work net with no seam allowances, and we always use our pivot point. So this is the waist dart, gives the waist suppression. Obviously if you didn't want a fitted waist, you can just eliminate that, considering your design ideas. We will later on talk about seams, so thinking about your artists and relating it all back to that. Obviously this is exactly the same as you've done with the skirt, but now we're working on the bodice. So I'm going to show you today how we're going to take the bodice. You've got the handout as well as the video that I'm doing for you, and you're going to be able to make it with this French dart, and that is a combined. So it's a bigger, wider dart because it's basically two darts in one. So I'll work just with the front, obviously small scale, but you can do it small scale with me, but I do want you to make a large scale toile. Put your pattern cutting spot and cross paper. Excuse me. So remember always your straight grain, nothing ever changes. This is net, no seam allowances. This is the centre front. Right, the neck on the bodice, on the blocks, this is fitted. This is very tight to your actual neck. So you have to remember things like if you want a tight fitting neck, then you would require a fastening to be able to get it on and off, and all of these considerations are part of your design. This shoulder is sort of out, it's quite a wide shoulder, so we're going to be talking about necklines, we're going to be talking about, you know, armhole shapes, and different things that you've got to start thinking about with your design research. So always mark the legs of the darts, so that's the width there. You should have two notches. You can put the centre one in as well if you want. Make sure you've got that centre pivot point. So on the block there may be three. It's the centre one that's really important, and then the widths. So make sure that that is marked when you trace it off, because that's what you're going to be doing all your pivoting for. So you've got, if you remember from last term, had a bit of a break. No more nice guys for us now, it's second term. You've got to remember, I called it no man's land. So these aren't really here because I've sewn or folded out these darts, okay? So this is your net, your no seam line sewing allowances. And you could do either the cut and slash or the pivot method. So if I start with the cut and slash, find my scissors. We just cut up one of them because we're going to combine these darts. So if we cut up on the outside of one of the darts, we can then fold that dart out. We have to cut them down, and we keep it joined at the bust. So you have to remember, you cut very neatly, not like I'm doing here, very, very neatly down on the net sewing line, that width of the dart, and try if you can to keep them attached at that pivot point. And then you just, and they call it a temporarily pivot it, move it. So I'm combining them, so you can see here where it was originally, and I've got a contrast mat underneath so you can see. So if I cut those out, that, you know, that they're your darts. So when I close this dart here, it's going to open it down there, so I can move that dart into the waist, and it's the whole width, these two sewing lines that stay as the dart. Alright, so I could do it the other way round. I could say, well, I want to temporarily open it. Move my camera angle a little bit. I just temporarily want to open it up here. So I'm then going to close it this way. It doesn't matter which way you move it to. You can see there I've got a fitted waist. So I think I'm going to do it this way round. So I've just put it on the two sewing lines. If you remember your dart, highlighter pens are really nice to work with. Really help you understand. That's your sewing line here. This is your sewing line here. Sewing line and sewing line. Okay, so it doesn't matter which way. I know that these are my sewing lines, so I can either have it here and that's my sewing line and that's my sewing line, or I can put it this way. It's just preference depending on your design, what you're going to do, where it's going to be. A bit of tape there, and I've kept this attached. If it comes undone, you just stick it back together. But I know this is now the width of my dart. That's why I coloured that bit in. All about that sewing line. So I've got my dart, I've got both darts, but at the minute they're just temporarily up in the shoulder, and I've got nothing here. This will allow me to draw my style line. I want a French dart, but you can play, excuse me, you can play with any shape. So can you remember we had curved darts? We might want some sort of angled shaped darts. You can cut and put them wherever you want your dart onto this side seam. So once you've done your French dart, you can play around with doing different darts into the side seam. Maybe you could do a dart into the shoulder seam and produce some samples, some toiles for me, looking at different darts on the front. So I'm just going to take it from that pivot point, the bust pivot point, and a French dart is a really strong angle. It could go down to the waist. This is the natural waist. I'm going to put mine a little bit up. Remember, this is my mini block, okay? So it's just about proportions. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this dart to here. So I'm going to highlight that line just so you understand where my sewing line is. And now I'm going to open the dart into my new line, my new French dart. Okay, I'm going to open it here. I want both of the combined dart open here, so I'm going to do it like that. Okay. Now remember, this is net, no seam allowances. So what we then have to do is, I like to work net. We would cut this out or trace it off and then add our seam allowances on. And the important bit is here, we need to shorten this dart about 2.5 centimetres on the big full-size block. And then we may want this so it's folded fabric, or you can have it so it's like when we did right back at the first couple of weeks, you did combined darts and they were cut away with seam allowances added on them. Okay. So that's it, net, no seam allowance, and this is just the front we're working with today. We can look at necklines, we can think about changing necklines later on. I want you to do a little bit of research into necklines, but we'll look at that in the next lesson. Today I just want you to practice combining and moving the bust and waist dart and creating some design ideas with that. So you can then remember to always keep your straight grain, so keep the spot and crosses lined up. We can trace this off accurately using rulers and add seam allowance onto it. Standard seam allowances are your 1.5 centimetre. You can use 1 centimetre if you want. But I just want to look at what happens at the seam allowance at the dart. How you fold it to get that seam allowance. So I'm going to shorten my dart from here. I'm going to bring it so it is the centre where this original dart was. I'm going from the centre point and I'm just moving that centre point down. So I've got the dart legs, the ends here. Okay, I know that's my centre front. Excuse me. I'm going to take that new centre point, which was basically moved down 2.5 centimetres on your full scale, just because you don't want the sewing point to end right on the bust point because it goes really baggy and unattractive, but keep the original width of the dart. And then you can fold. You need to look at what goes on when you fold it, because it changes slightly, that dart, when you fold it with your new dart. The easiest thing to do is fold a dart on the corner of a table. It just helps. Some people like to fold darts up, some people like to fold them down. It's a preference, learner choices. So when you fold them, what you want to do is get your tracing wheel, just check, you can see it, that straight line, that side seam's changed a little bit. So you just want to make sure, okay, you want to make sure, and if this is in the corner of the table it'll be much easier. Make sure that bit of the dart's laying flat, and then you can draw from your waist to your bust, and it just fills it in a little bit here. And then if you use your tracing wheel and trace along there, okay, so you'll just need to trace your tracing wheel along here. I haven't got mine handy at the moment, so I can just use a push pin just to get the same effect. So you just need to make sure that that line, okay, you get the markings come through. You can see there the dots that have come, can you see? I'm sure you can. Yeah, you can see there the dots that have come through, that line there, that's what your tracing wheel does. And then when you open it out, it will give you the sewing line. Now mine goes in because I folded the dart up. If you do it and fold the dart the other way, this is personal preference, sometimes it's to do with what's going on here. So here I would fold the dart up, so on the inside that's out of the way because it's quite near the waist. If you had a different angle, you might want to fold the dart down, which is normal for domestic patterns. People have different reasons why they do it. And then you do the same thing, but you can see there with my shadows, I'm going to have a completely different shaped pattern if you trace that off. So this is another little thing that you need to consider when you're doing your patterns. Which way do you want your darts, your combined dart, to go? Because there you can see you get this very strange shape here. You need to do this because otherwise when you fold your dart, you don't have the fabric behind it to match it at the side seam. So you add your seam allowance onto your pattern, a 1 or 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, So this is the one that was folded down with seam allowance. And remember to add the seam allowance onto the waist as well. And then you will make design decisions whether yours is centre front on the fold, whether you've got seam allowances. We're going to look up armhole shapes, whether we're adding trims into them. We're going to look at the neck. We're going to look at different types of necks, halter necks, gathering into necks, darts into necks, lots and lots of endless possibilities that you need to start considering for your designs, looking at the artist, inspiration from your mood boards. And I want you to relate all of that to these toiles that you're looking at now. Get in the habit of sort of designing for your individual samples right from the start for the project. It's all part of your finished hand-in work. So everything's individual. So this one you can see with the pattern, I've got that dart, and it's going to be, when it's sewn, it will be sewn and folded down, and then you need that piece of fabric there, otherwise you'll get gaps and holes. So that's if it's folded down. If I chose to have my dart folded up, you'd need to trim that bit there off. It doesn't work that way around. And so straight away, obviously you need to put your notches on, your sewist, machinist, knows which way and how to fold this combined dart, because this cutaway is telling them. And so they know that they match those two dart legs up, they sew their dart, sew it off, and then it's pressed. And that one's pressed up the way I've done it there. And so you have then created a pattern piece for the French dart. I'd like you to then go and explore, look into different types of dart. You could make it a curved one, and as I say, you could put combined darts. Look at doing the combined darts. I'll just quickly go over how you would do that exactly the same, but using the pivoting method rather than the cut and slash method. Okay, so if you're going to do the same French darts, you can see on this block I've started drawing different lines, and that's kind of the way I work. So on my French dart I will pick the angle straight away on my block where I want that combined dart to be. So I've decided that this is where I want my style line to be. That's the angle I'm looking at. And then you're working, you have to remember that centre front, those grain lines. It's very important when you're doing the pivot method. Because what I'm going to do is trace off here. And so I've done the neckline and this dart here. So it doesn't really, again, it doesn't matter whether you do top or bottom first, but we'll close this top one out. So I've still got this waist dart here, a bit more tricky what I'm doing. So I'm just going to work on this top half with this line first, and then I'm going to come back to this. So it's really important that you match up that centre front line so you can keep working backwards and forwards. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it with my pen, and I'm going to close that bust dart. So I have that dart there moved, and I'm just going to close it, match the notches up, and then I'm going to trace it down to my style line here of that French dart. That was the line, so I know my French dart's going from this point here to there. So I've now got that top bit dealt with. So I'll reset my block, just doing that pivot, keeping it all here, and then I'll address closing out the waist dart. So I'm going to trace down here, and then I'm going to close this dart out, and then finish tracing this section and marking in the French dart. So I've still got my combined dart here and here, and I'm going to shorten it like I did before. I've got to exactly the same pattern piece, but rather than doing cut and slash, what I've done is I've done it all in one by pivoting it around. So you can see that when I've redrawn that dart, there it is here, that was my pivot point there, that's the same. And if I just draw that dart in for you to see, you'll understand that both methods get to exactly the same finish point. It's just which you prefer, whether you prefer doing cut and slash or the pivot. Anyway, have fun.